What separates a man from a monster? Is it the uniform he wears, the flag he fights for, or the orders he follows? Or is it a choice, a single, silent decision made in a fleeting moment when no one is watching? A choice that reveals the true measure of a soul. For Oberleutnant Franz Stigler of the Luftwaffe, that moment came at 22,000 feet, suspended between the frozen heavens and a hostile earth, with death as his only co-pilot. The cold inside the cockpit of his Messerschmitt Bf 109 was a living thing. It seeped through his leather gloves, bit at his fingertips, and turned his breath into clouds of vapor. But the chill that gripped his heart was far colder. It was an ice-cold dread that had nothing to do with the altitude. He glanced at the fuel gauge for the 10th time, his eyes pleading with the needle, begging it to move. It remained stubbornly, cruelly, on empty. The engine, his mechanical heart, had already begun its death rattle. It sputtered, coughed, a desperate, gasping sound, fighting for a single drop of aviation fuel that simply was not there. The vibration that had been his constant companion for hours ceased. An eerie, terrifying silence fell, broken only by the whistle of the wind over his canopy. He was a stone dropped from heaven. Below him, a patchwork of emerald fields and brown forests stretched for 50 miles of enemy territory. 50 miles controlled by the Americans. Behind him, his own airfield was a ghost, an unreachable memory. And all around him, the vast, unforgiving sky belonged to them. Franz's hands, slick with sweat, trembled on the control stick. He had heard the stories. Every pilot had. They were whispered in the mess halls, shared in hushed tones before a mission. The Americans, they were not like other combatants. They were barbarians, his commander's voice echoed in his mind. They didn't just shoot you down. They circled your parachute like vultures, strafing the helpless, dangling fabric, turning a man into a sieve before he ever touched the ground. Easy target practice. If you bailed out over Allied territory, you were as good as dead. The engine coughed one last time, a final metallic sigh, and then nothing. The propeller windmilled, a useless pinwheel in the slipstream, dead stick, no power. He was gliding now, a 3-ton metal bird, with a 30-foot wingspan, held aloft only by physics and rapidly diminishing luck. Straight ahead he could see it, an airfield, a captured Luftwaffe base, now bristling with the alien shapes of American aircraft. He had maybe 2 minutes. 2 minutes to choose between bailing out into the waiting guns of ground troops or attempting a forced landing that would surely end in a fiery wreck or capture. His family in Bavaria flashed before his eyes, his mother's gentle face, his younger sister's laugh. They would get a telegram, missing in action. Missing in action, a cold, bureaucratic phrase to summarize a son's violent end. They would never know. Burned alive? Shot from his parachute? Beaten to death by angry soldiers? The possibilities were a gallery of horrors in his mind. And then he saw them. 2 silver specks in his mirror, growing larger with terrifying speed. P-51 Mustangs. The sharks of the sky. The most lethal American fighters in the European theater. Franz's mouth went dry. This was it. A quick, brutal end. At least it would be quick. But what happened next was not quick. It was not brutal. It was impossible. The lead Mustang didn't open fire. It slid in, smooth and predatory, pulling alongside his dying Messerschmitt. Close. Dangerously close. Perhaps 50 feet off his wingtip. Through the crystal-clear canopy, Franz saw the pilot. An American. Young, maybe his own age, mid-20s. His face was unreadable beneath his helmet and oxygen mask. But his hands, they weren't on the gun triggers. The American was looking at him, making eye contact, a steady, unnerving gaze across the void. Then, The American pilot did something that shattered Franz's reality. He pointed down, not aggressively, but helpfully, pointing toward the airfield below. Franz stared, his mind reeling. A trick? Was this some cruel American game? A cat toying with a mouse before the final pounce? The second Mustang took up a position on his other wing, a mirror image of the first. They had him boxed in, two silver shepherds guiding a black-crossed sheep. His altimeter unwound like a clock, counting down the last seconds of his life. 18,000 feet. The lead pilot pointed down again, more insistently this time. Then he made another gesture, a strange pantomime in the sky, palms down, a pushing motion. Counted down, slow down. Land. But system. They were helping him. They were escorting him. The words didn't compute. Nothing in his training, nothing in the hateful propaganda, nothing in the grim survival tales had prepared him for this. It was a gesture from a different universe. His Messerschmitt, at dead weight now, sliced through the air. 15,000 feet. The airfield was directly ahead, its runways stark against the green countryside. He could see the rows of American planes, tiny figures of ground crew moving like ants. To land there was to surrender, to become a prisoner of war, at the mercy of the barbarians. Every propaganda film reeled through his mind, images of torture, of summary executions, of prisoners worked to death in frozen labor camps. Better to die in combat than to surrender. His commanding officer's words were a drumbeat in his skull, but he had no options left. The ground was rushing up to meet him, and the Americans, they stayed with him. One on each wing, a silent, impossible honor guard. 10,000 feet, 8,000, 5,000. Franz's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. He kept waiting for the betrayal, the sudden brilliant flash of machine gun fire that would tear his wings off. It never came. At 3,000 feet, the lead pilot rocked his wings, a clean, sharp signal. "Conks, your show now." Then he peeled off, a graceful silver arc, giving Franz room to maneuver. The second Mustang lingered a moment longer, a final, watchful shepherd, before pulling up and away, its engine a fading roar. Franz was alone with his dying plane. His hands flew across the controls, driven by instinct and years of training. He worked the hand crank to lower the landing gear, muscle and sinew replacing the dead hydraulics. The wheels locked down with a solid, reassuring thunk. He lined up on the runway, fighting the unresponsive controls, stretching the glide, praying to a god he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. 50 feet, 2010. The wheels kissed the concrete with a shriek of tortured rubber. The Messerschmitt bounced once, hard, then settled, rolling down the endless strip of tarmac. He had no brakes. The plane finally shuddered to a stop at the far end of the runway. For a long moment, Franz just sat there, hands welded to the control stick, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. The silence was absolute. And then he saw them. Jeeps. Olive-drab Beetles racing towards him across the airfield, kicking up dust. American soldiers. This was it. The moment of capture. A fleeting thought of his sidearm, of a final defiant stand. The death of a German officer. But something stopped him. The image of that American pilot, pointing, guiding, saving. They could have killed him. They had chosen not to. With trembling fingers, Franz unbuckled his harness, pushed open the heavy canopy, and slowly, deliberately, raised his hands into the cold foreign air. The first American to reach him was a sergeant, a man with a square jaw and weary eyes. He scrambled onto the wing, pistol drawn, but the barrel was pointed down, a gesture of caution, not aggression. "Out," the sergeant said in English. Then, to Franz's astonishment, he added in broken, heavily accented German, "Raus, langsam." "Krukes." Out. Slowly. Franz climbed out of the cockpit, his legs shaking so violently he could barely stand. The adrenaline of the past 3 hours had left him hollowed out, a fragile shell. He stood on the wing, hands high, a surrendering enemy, waiting for the blow, the shove, the guttural curse. It didn't come. The sergeant, a man named Robert Hayes from a place called Oklahoma, holstered his pistol. He reached out a hand and steadied Franz as he climbed down. "Easy there, buddy," Hayes said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "You okay? Verletzt? Injured?" Franz stared at him, dumbfounded. The American was checking on his well-being. Genuine concern was etched on his face. "9," Franz managed, his voice a dry rasp. "Not injured." "Good. Come on, then." Hayes gestured toward the jeep. Not roughly. Not with the authority of a conqueror. Casually, almost as if Franz were a visiting pilot who'd had a bit of bad luck. In the jeep, he sat squeezed between 2 GIs. Neither pointed a weapon at him. They just sat, 2 young men in olive drab, smelling of cigarette smoke, engine oil, and something like army coffee. One of them held out a canteen. "Water?" Franz hesitated for a heartbeat, the ingrained fear warring with a desperate, animal thirst. He took it. The metal was cool against his lips. The water was cold and clean, and it was quite possibly the best thing he had ever tasted in his life. It sluiced the dust and fear from his throat. "Danky," he whispered. The soldier just grinned, a flash of white teeth in a grimy face. "You're welcome, pal." They drove him to the base operations building, a wooden structure buzzing with activity. Inside, the warmth was a physical shock after the frozen altitude. An intelligence officer was waiting. Captain James Mitchell, a man with thinning hair and a professor's eyes, who spoke German with a flawless academic precision. "Sit down," Mitchell said, pointing to a chair. It wasn't a hard stool in a bare interrogation room. It was a padded office chair. On the desk was a percolator, bubbling away. The aroma of real coffee filled the air, so rich and intoxicating it made Franz's head spin. "You want some?" Mitchell asked, already pouring a cup without waiting for an answer. Franz could only nod, his voice lost somewhere in his throat. Mitchell handed him the steaming mug, hot, black, and on the saucer beside it, 2 perfect white cubes of sugar. Sugar. Real sugar. Franz hadn't seen it in months. Germany was starving, rationing every grain. And here, the barbarians were giving it to a prisoner. "Those were good pilots who brought you in," Mitchell said conversationally. "Captain Joe Henderson and Lieutenant Charlie Brennan, 357th Fighter Group. They saw your engine was out. Figured you might want to live through the day." Franz sipped the coffee. It burned his tongue, and he welcomed the pain. "Why?" The word escaped him. A hoarse, involuntary sound. Mitchell looked up from his papers, a flicker of genuine curiosity in his eyes. "Why what? Why didn't they shoot me down? Why did they help me?" Mitchell leaned back in his chair, and for the first time, he seemed truly puzzled. He looked at Franz as if he'd asked why the sky was blue. "Because you were defenseless," he said simply. "What kind of men do you think we are?" In that small, warm office, with the smell of coffee in the air and a simple question hanging between them, Franz Stiegler's world began to crumble. He was taken to the prisoner holding area. He expected a cage, a barbed wire pen. What he found was a converted barracks building with rows of bunks, wool blankets, and a pot-bellied stove radiating a glorious warmth. There were a dozen other German prisoners there, all airmen, all captured recently. They all wore the same expression he felt on his own face, a deep, profound, shell-shocked confusion. Later, an American medic came by. Despite Franz's insistence that he was fine, the medic examined him anyway. He checked his blood pressure, peered into his eyes with a small light, and listened to his heart with a cold stethoscope. "You're dehydrated," the medic said, speaking through an interpreter. And you've got some frostbite starting on your fingers. We'll get you fixed up." They gave him a greasy ointment for his hands, another thick wool blanket, and a box, an American K ration. Inside, he found canned meat, hard crackers, a small bar of chocolate, and 4 cigarettes. The chocolate was dark and rich. He unwrapped it slowly, reverently. The taste was a ghost from a forgotten time, a memory of childhood, of life before the war. He ate it in tiny bites, savoring the sweetness, a stark contrast to the bitterness that had filled his life for years. That evening, as dusk settled over the airfield, a visitor appeared at the barracks. It was Captain Henderson, the pilot who had led the escort. He carried a thermos and a pack of cigarettes. "Thought you might be hungry," Henderson said, his words translated by a guard. He poured a cup of steaming soup and handed it to Franz. "That was some nice flying, by the way. Dead stick landing in a 109 on an unfamiliar runway. Impressive." Franz was speechless. This man, this enemy, had held his life in his hands hours earlier. Now he was complimenting his airmanship, treating him not as a defeated foe, but as a professional colleague who'd had a bad day at the office. Henderson pulled a worn leather wallet from his flight jacket and took out a creased photograph, a smiling woman and 2 small children squinting in the sun. "My wife, Betty, and my kids," he said, his voice softening. "Donna is 5. Little Joe just turned 3. He looked at Franz. "You got family?" Franz nodded slowly, the lump returning to his throat. "My mother, my sister." "They'll be glad to know you made it down safe," Henderson said matter-of-factly. "Red Cross will notify them. You're a POW. Better than missing in action, right?" They sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, 2 men from opposing worlds, united by the universal language of family photos and the shared, unspoken bond of the sky. "Listen," Henderson said finally, his gaze direct. "I know what they told you about us. Probably said we'd torture you, shoot prisoners, all that garbage." He shook his head. "But that's not who we are. You're going to be treated according to the Geneva Convention. You'll get medical care, food, mail, and when this war is over, and it will be over soon, you'll go home." Franz felt something inside him crack. Not break, but crack open, like a frozen river thawing in the spring sun. In a halting, broken mix of German and English, he pieced together a sentence. "In Germany, they tell us Americans are animals." Henderson let out a short laugh, but there was no malice in it. "Yeah, well," he said, clapping Franz lightly on the shoulder. "They told us you guys eat babies for breakfast. Propaganda is a hell of a thing, isn't it?" Over the next 3 weeks, in that temporary POW camp, Franz's entire indoctrinated worldview was dismantled, piece by piece, not by force, but by a relentless, baffling decency. The food was not luxurious, but it was consistent. K-rations, powdered eggs, canned hash, the same food the American GIs were eating. When the coveted Red Cross parcels arrived, a guard announced that prisoners got first pick, a policy that left the Germans dumbfounded. Chocolate, real coffee, soap, cigarettes, small miracles that felt like treasures to men who had been subsisting on ersatz coffee and sawdust bread. The medical care was unwavering. One of the new prisoners, a young pilot named Werner, had been shot in the leg before his capture. The wound was severe. Werner was certain they would amputate. Instead, American doctors operated, removing the bullet fragments, administering precious sulfa drugs, and changing his bandages daily. Werner would walk with a limp, but he would walk. In a German field hospital, with resources stretched thin, he would have lost the leg. In a Soviet camp, he would have lost his life. Franz watched the guards, the young American soldiers, with a wary, analytical eye, waiting for the mask to slip, for the cruelty to emerge. It never did. They were professional, often bored, sometimes even friendly. A fresh-faced guard from Nebraska named Tommy, who couldn't have been more than 19, struck up a conversation. He taught Franz the rules of a strange game called baseball. In return, Franz taught Tommy a litany of colorful German curse words. They would stand by the wire fence, two boys in different uniforms, laughing together. The prisoners were allowed to write letters home. They were censored, of course, but they were sent. The Red Cross facilitated the exchange. Franz wrote to his mother, his hand still stiff from the frostbite. "I am alive. I am uninjured. I am being treated well." He wondered if she would believe him. He was beginning to understand something profound. This wasn't kindness born of weakness or naivete. It was decency born of strength. It was a system, a code. The Americans were following rules, the Geneva Convention, not because their enemies were, but because they believed in them. It took a strange kind of strength, he realized, to treat your enemy with dignity while your own countrymen were dying at his hands. One afternoon, a sound drifted across the compound. Music. A swing band. Someone had set up a radio, and the joyful, intricate sounds of Glenn Miller's orchestra filled the air. Franz found himself tapping his foot, a forgotten rhythm returning to him. He had loved American swing music before the war, before the party had banned it as degenerate, impure culture. A guard noticed his smile. "You like swing?" he asked. Franz nodded. "Before the war, yes." "No kidding? Hold on." The guard disappeared into the operations building and returned a few minutes later with a portable record player and a small stack of 78s. Benny Goodman, Duke Ellington, Artie Shaw. He set it up in the barracks common room. "There you go," the guard said with a shrug. "Enjoy." That night, a surreal scene unfolded. German prisoners of war and their American guards sat in the same room, heads nodding, feet tapping to the same infectious rhythm. For a few hours, they were not enemies. They were just men who liked jazz. Another incident solidified his transformation. A new prisoner arrived, a Luftwaffe ace named Klaus, who had been horribly burned when his Focke-Wulf was shot down. His hands were swaddled in bandages, his face a mask of scarred tissue and raw anger. He was a true believer, his mind still a fortress of Nazi propaganda. "They'll kill us all eventually," Klaus spat in German, his voice full of venom. "They are just fattening us up for the slaughter, like pigs." Franz shook his head. "No, Klaus, you are wrong. They are not like that." "You've been brainwashed by their kindness," Klaus sneered. "No," Franz corrected him softly. "I've been treated like a human being, maybe for the first time in 5 years." Klaus refused to believe it. Not at first. But his fortress of hate began to crumble, day by day. It crumbled as an American doctor painstakingly treated his burns, changing the dressings with gentle hands, administering morphine for the searing pain. It crumbled as a young American nurse sat by his cot during the worst nights when the pain made him delirious, just talking to him in her clumsy, broken German, her presence a simple, comforting anchor in his sea of agony. 3 days before the final German surrender, Captain Mitchell, the intelligence officer, gathered the prisoners. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. "The war is almost over," he said in his clear, precise German. "You will all be going home soon." A murmur went through the men. Home. The word itself was a dream. "But I want you to understand something," Mitchell continued, his gaze sweeping over them. "When you get back, your country will be in ruins. Germany is going to need rebuilding, not just the cities, but the ideas. It is going to need men who understand that the Nazi way was the wrong way. Men who can help build something better, something democratic." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I hope you will be those men." In that moment, Franz understood. This wasn't just about being nice. This was strategy. This was the long game. The Americans weren't just winning the war. They were already planning the peace. They were thinking about what came after. They were turning enemies into the future architects of a new Allied Germany. It was a vision grander and more far-sighted than any German general had ever articulated. The humane treatment was not an accident or the whim of a few good men. It was official American military policy, flowing from the very top. General Eisenhower himself had made it clear. Prisoners of war would be treated according to the Geneva Convention. Period. Not as a reciprocal gesture, German and Japanese POW camps were notoriously brutal, but as a statement of American values. The numbers tell the story with cold, hard clarity. Of the nearly 380,000 German POWs held in the United States, the survival rate was over 99%. In German camps holding Soviet prisoners, the survival rate was closer to 40%. This wasn't because Americans were soft, it was because they were smart. They understood that how you treat a defeated enemy determines the shape of the peace that follows. Every German prisoner who returned home with a story of fair treatment was an ambassador for a new relationship, a counter-narrative to Goebbels' hate-filled propaganda. Franz kept a small diary during his captivity, a record now preserved in a German military archive. Its entries chart his de-radicalization in real time. Asterisk, March 24th, captured by Americans. Expected death, received coffee and blankets instead. I cannot understand this. Asterisk, March 30th, the guards treat us like soldiers, not animals. One shared his cigarettes with me. His name is Tommy. He has a farm in Nebraska. Asterisk, April 10th. We listened to American music tonight. I had forgotten what it felt like to simply enjoy something beautiful. The war seems very far away. Asterisk, April 28th. Germany has surrendered. We will go home soon. I do not know what I will find there, but I know now that everything they told us about the Americans was a lie. They are not monsters. They are men. Decades later, an elderly Franz Stigler would reflect in an interview, his voice thick with emotion. Those American pilots saved my life twice. Once, when they escorted me down from the sky, and again, when they showed me that decency had not been entirely consumed by the war. They gave me back my hope for humanity. Franz Stigler was repatriated in August 1945. He returned to a ghost country. He found his mother and sister alive in Bavaria, huddled in the half-destroyed shell of their home. But they were alive. His hometown was a landscape of rubble, a testament to the totality of the war he had fought. With Germany grounded, he eventually found work using his skills, becoming a commercial airline pilot for the newly formed Lufthansa in the 1950s, a symbol of his country's own slow climb back into the sky. But he never forgot. He never forgot the cold, the fear, the impossible sight of two silver Mustangs acting as guardian angels. In 1961, Franz immigrated to Canada, building a new life and a successful business. He raised a family in peace. But the question of why and who never left him. For years, he quietly searched for the American pilots, specifically the lead pilot, Captain Joe Henderson. He wrote to veterans, associations, scoured pilot rosters, chased down leads. It became a quiet, personal crusade. Finally, in 1989, a newsletter for the 357th Fighter Group published his story. A retired pilot living in Florida saw it. Joe Henderson. They arranged to meet at an airport hotel. When Franz, now a gray-haired grandfather, saw Joe for the first time in 44 years, he didn't shake his hand. He simply broke down and wept, embracing the man who was once his enemy. Two old men, whose lives had intersected for a few terrifying minutes in the skies over Germany, holding each other in an airport terminal. "Thank you," Franz choked out, the words he had rehearsed for decades. "Thank you for giving me my life." Henderson, ever modest, just patted his back. "It was the right thing to do," he said. They remained inseparable friends until Henderson's death in 2001. At his funeral, Franz Stigler stood before a crowd of American veterans and told the story of the day an enemy became a wingman, a captor became a savior, and propaganda crumbled in the face of simple human decency. Franz's story was one among thousands, but their cumulative effect was world-changing. By treating its prisoners humanely, America didn't just win the war, it won the peace. The Marshall Plan, the ambitious project to rebuild Western Europe, succeeded in Germany because the German people were willing to accept American help. And they were willing because their personal experiences, on the battlefield and in the POW camps, had shown them that America could, by and large, be trusted. West Germany, the former heart of the Third Reich, became a cornerstone of NATO, a democratic and economic powerhouse, a vital partner in the Cold War. That historic transformation didn't happen by accident. It was built on a foundation of millions of small acts of decency. In a 1995 interview, Franz reflected on the deeper lesson. "I learned that propaganda is a poison that rots the soul. Both sides told lies. But the difference was, when I met the Americans face to face, their actions contradicted their propaganda. They showed me, through their behavior, that human beings could choose to be decent even in the midst of a terrible war. That choice, that is what separates civilization from barbarism." Before his own death in 2008, Franz returned one last time to the airfield where he had landed. It was a peaceful civilian airport now. He stood at the edge of the runway, a frail old man remembering a terrified young one. "I died that day," he said quietly to his daughter. "The man who believed all the lies, who hated without knowing why. He died in that cockpit. And I was reborn as someone who understood that our common humanity is stronger than any flag, any uniform, any temporary enmity." Franz Stigler's story is not just a footnote in history, it's a timeless lesson. Those American pilots had every reason and every right to shoot him down. But they chose to see a defenseless human being, not just an enemy uniform. That single choice rippled through time. It saved one man, who went on to raise a family, who told his story to his children and grandchildren. His grandson, inspired, became a pilot in the new German Air Force and served alongside American pilots in NATO exercises. The cycle had come full circle. Enemies to captors, to allies to partners. In a world still rife with division, it's a stark reminder of what is possible when we refuse to dehumanize our adversaries. Strength is not just the power to destroy, it is also the wisdom to show restraint. On March 24, 1945, Franz Stigler expected to die as an enemy of America. He landed and found not the monsters he was promised, but men. Men who believed that even in the heart of darkness, there are lines you do not cross. That wasn't just military doctrine, it was national character. And it changed the world.
Dear viewers, thank you for being here. Stay tuned to the channel for tons of exciting videos. Every day we upload fresh stories packed with thrills, suspense, and surprises. Don't miss out. Comment, share, subscribe, and hit that like button. This channel is for you, and the best is yet to come.